I would like to talk about humanity, the thinking species, question mark, or the thinking species. Let's examine that. Actually, we tend to think of ourselves as the species that can reason, the species that can think. In fact, we think of that as being one of the main differences between ourselves and the animal kingdom. And to a degree, that's true. We do have the potential for conscious thought. That's what makes being a human being such a precious situation to find oneself in. It is considered to be the optimum opportunity because having the potential for thinking, having the potential for reason and logic, and having the potential for the kind of understanding necessary, we can therefore practice Dharma. Of course, animals cannot practice Dharma. They can be trained to look like they're practicing Dharma, perhaps. You might be able to train a really smart dog to sit in front of a Dharma book and look back and forth like he's reading it. You might be able to train a very smart dog to stick up his paw and drape a mala over it. You might be able to do that. You might even be able to train a really smart dog to do a prostration, doggy style. But it wouldn't be practicing Dharma. Because animals do not have the space in their minds to practice Dharma, and that's the main difference. We think of it as intelligence, but the main difference is that animals are operating on an extremely and deeply reactive level. They're simply reactive, and also very sensual. When I say sensual, I don't mean sensual in a positive way. I mean that the way that their mind perceives is there's no depth to it. They ride simply on the surface of their experience. It's a very, almost like sliding downhill, their experience seems to be. When a dog needs to go out to the bathroom, for instance, a dog will stand by the door. I used to have a dog that did this. It was a scream. The dog will stand by the door and look at the door, like that, and look some more. Then look at you like, hello, and then look at the door. That's the kind of thing that dogs will do. It's a learned behavior, and it looks as though, to us, as though they are reasoning at that moment. They're reasoning. There's the door. I must go out the door. There's the person. It isn't like that at all. It's that they have had the experience of going outside of the door and being able to relieve themselves, and in a sensual way that was pleasurable to them. So they look at the door with profound lust. Truly, it is like a deep lust. They lust for the door. They lust for that experience. And the wonderful kind of excitement that animals have when they see their masters, or when they get some food, or when master picks up the leash and it's time to go out, that kind of excitement, we mistake that as being thinking, in the sense that the dog has capacity for real joy. Not so. The dog is reacting habitually. They are perceiving things in a sensual way and responding because of the lust that they feel for a particular sensual experience. And so that's what's actually happening there. But we as humans are supposed to be different. We are supposed to have more space in our minds. We are supposed to have a different capacity for thought. But actually, I have found that one of the single most important and devastating blocks to being able to practice Dharma is our inability to think clearly. Because although we have the capacity for thought, and we may be the only species that does, it seems that every other species is in a much deeper reactive kind of phenomena. That we too are in a deeply reactive place. That we too are deeply reactive within our minds. We're not all that different. However, it should be remembered that even while I'm saying this, this is not a message of hopelessness, you understand. What I'm saying is that although we are not hitting the mark at this point, we do have the capacity for reason. We do have the capacity for clear discrimination. In fact, in this lifetime, in this body, this particular kind of body, with the wiring and the setup that you do have the capacity for enlightenment in this body. The problem is that most of us, as practitioners, are not hitting that mark anywhere close. Now let's talk about that. Rinpoche touched on this briefly the other day, and it gave me the idea that I would use this opportunity perhaps to elaborate on that. Our condition that we find ourselves in now is that we don't think in whole equations. We simply have never learned the skill of logical and reasonable thought, thinking in whole equations. A whole equation would include both cause and result, cause and effect. We never think in terms of cause and effect. Practically never, unless we have engaged diligently in the mind training necessary to hold that teaching dear and to consider it extremely important. We simply don't think in terms of cause and effect. We think in incomplete equations. Let's ask ourselves, first of all, why that's so. Well, why that's so is that we're limited in our experience, first of all. And we have only partial awareness of our particular status and of our nature. If you think on a very superficial level, on a human level, the awareness that we have begins a few years after our birth. At that time, the mind, the perception begins to organize sufficiently so that we can begin to remember and reason and see our environment in such a way as to retain information. So, from soon after the time of our birth and up until the time of the present moment, we have cognition in the way that we understand it. We have perception, we can take in our environment, we can remember, we can recall, we can learn. That is one thing about us that is really unique and is not used as much as it should be used. We are a learning computer. It isn't just input, we also learn. We don't use that as well as we might, you know. We can learn a lot more than we do. But at any rate, that experience that we've had from soon after our birth to the present moment is all the information we actually have to learn with, to compute and to evaluate with. Now the problem is that although we may have been told, and fairly recently I would assume, by our teachers that yes, we have lived before, yes, life is impermanent, yes, the experiences that we're having in our present life is at least in a great part due to the experiences that we've had before. In other words, we've created the causes in our previous incarnations. We've heard this and we're listening to it and we're remembering it and we're memorizing it and sometimes we're even repeating it back by rote. But are we getting it? No. It's very difficult to get. What happens is that for us, the information remains almost peripheral, kind of out there. It doesn't really affect our inner lives deeply. The reason why is that it's very difficult for us to see directly the relationship between cause and effect. Our teachers can tell us, we can memorize it, and sometimes our teachers will be able to give us methods by which we can see directly cause and effect. But the reason why we can't see cause and effect clearly enough is that most of the causes for the experiences that we are now experiencing and the conditions that we are now experiencing, including how we feel right now, how we look, how we live, what our relationships are like, our level of poverty or wealth, our level of happiness or unhappiness, all of these things, although we cannot see it, are due in a great degree to causes that we did not implement in this lifetime. And so we have developed the habit of looking at ourselves and saying, why is this happening to me? I'm innocent. Why is this happening? And it feels like a heartbreak. It feels like we are completely cast adrift on this sea where anything could happen and we have no control. Once we adapt that idea that things simply happen to us from the outside and we have no control, then we really are adrift. We are truly and completely lost. And that is the truth. But remember, the reason why you may think that things happen to you from outside, rather than your own karma being ripened, is that you have no memory of the causes that you yourself created in the past. It's perfectly understandable that you would feel the way you do. It's perfectly understandable that the first time you hear that you yourself have created all the causes that you are now living with the results of, that you may not even like what you've heard, and maybe, kill the messenger, not even like the teacher that said it to you. You can kill the messenger if you want to, but the message is still true. Oh, please don't. But the message is still true, and nothing is going to change that. But you have the capacity to change things. If you can trust that while your perception is limited, relatively speaking, you can see from the beginning of your life to the present moment, and even that we don't quite remember. Haven't you ever yourself experienced something really negative and at the time not understood what was happening and then later realized that you might have set this one up yourself? So even if it happens, even if we create cause and effect relationships that ripen completely in this lifetime, we still are kind of mindless about it. We just don't think it through because we don't have that habit. So it's perfectly understandable that you feel the way you do. But what you have to accept is that, as I was saying, you have a limited experience from here to here, whereas the experience, limited perception rather, whereas the perception of your teachers, and perhaps you should think this way, the perception of Lord Buddha himself, who gave the original teachings, is much greater than that. Much greater than that. Lord Buddha was said to have the kind of omniscience where a student would come before him and make prostration or ask to take teaching or something like that, and Lord Buddha himself would be able to see exactly every single cause and effect relationship that brought him to that present moment. And therefore, he would be able to teach that person very succinctly and very strategically, building on their present experience, their former experience, giving them exactly the nectar that they needed. That was Lord Buddha's wonderful, incredible ability and his omniscience. What we have to do now is we have to have confidence in that. We have to face the fact that our own perception is quite limited. I mean, reason it out, think it through. If your brain was born 30-odd years ago, or whatever it is, not likely your brain would have been remembering things from before. Again, you may have some experiences that are karmically connected to things that have happened in the past, and you may have an intuitive sense of something that happened in the past, but you still, at that level, do not know cause and effect relationships, believe me. Whatever intuitive experience you've had about the past is not sufficient to teach you that. So we have to rely on the perception of our teachers. According to our teachers, we have lived since time out of mind. Beginningless time, literally beginningless. Because the brain that we have cannot fathom that length of time. So we have had time to create unbelievable numbers of causes. I can tell you also that cause and result ripen at the same time. They ripen simultaneously. We don't experience them simultaneously because due to our delusion, believing in self-nature as being inherently real, we also experience the experience of time and space as being objective. They are external. They affect us. The moment we conceive of self-nature as being inherently real, we have to discriminate between self and other. We have to discriminate also, which is even more elaborate, between the experience we are having and the experience someone else is having. And we have to put those experiences into the shape of continuum. Because the way that our deluded minds work in that divided mentality, that's the way we have to experience. That's simply the way that kind of limited perception and deluded perception works. We have to experience ourselves as a creature or a thing or a separate object, a separate self. As a separate self, we are separate from everything, including time and space. And to measure that experience, we have to experience it moving through continuum. So we think that in our delusion, again, it's like we're drunk, it's kind of like a narcotic kind of thing. We experience that we have given rise to a cause. We see this. Let's see, what cause? I think to myself, I'm really in a bad mood today. I'm in such a bad mood today. I am really feeling like spitting nails. So what I'm going to do is comfort myself with a little negative thought. I'm going to have a bad mood about everybody. I don't like you and 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 all of you. That makes me feel a lot better. You see, that's what we think. And sometimes we do think like that. We think I'm in a bad mood, I have earned it, I deserve it, and it's mine. And so we don't realize that we are creating, in fact, we're deluded thinking that we're creating a cause that in some odd, bizarre way comforts us. When you're in that frame of mind, you just kind of want to be that way. Well, many people think like that, and they don't realize any kind of cause and result. But the moment that you are abusive or unkind or judgmental or critical or gossipy, that's another one, about other people, the moment that you do that, what happens is you give birth to the cause and you give birth to the result. They arise simultaneously and interdependently. As one exists, so does the other. Therefore, if you're experiencing the result, if you've gotten to that point, you can also say the same equation. As one exists, so does the other. You see? And you can work it either way. You can use an ounce of prevention, which is the best way to go, obviously. Simply learn not to create the negative causes. Learn not to plant that seed. But the other way that you can go, and this is the way that most sentient beings find themselves in the position of having to go, because of the nature of samsara and because of the nature of delusion and forgetfulness, is that we find ourselves smack dab stuck in the middle of the result, to the point where we can hardly see straight. And sometimes the result is devastating, such as life-threatening illness. It's very hard to think clearly under such conditions. In the case of life-threatening illness, or in the case of, let's say, extreme poverty, or in the case of maybe having some sort of accident, or in the case of, what else, perhaps being a terribly unattractive person, to where you feel that you are not attractive on any level, physically, emotionally, mentally, and many people feel that way about themselves. And therefore, you don't have the ability to connect in a pure way or a clean way with anyone else, really, because you don't have confidence in their love or their friendship. That kind of loneliness, you may find yourself in the middle of that. And in most cases, most sentient beings, the only thing that they can do at that point is to grieve and to react. React by experiencing their own experience as being so horrible that they just kind of fall into it, in the same way that you fall into a pit of squishy stuff and you just can't get out of it, can't get out of it, can't get out of it. And the problem is, the more you fall into that pit of profound reaction and self-pity and grief, the more you increase the karma and relationship between yourself of self-pity, grief, and suffering. You see? So the more you increase it, it becomes like a tar pit. You know, it becomes endless, endless, endless. And it is possible as well to get to the point where even when you hear someone telling you, get out of the pit, stop now, pull it together. These are the teachings. Even when a teacher can say that to you in a way that you can understand, it sometimes is the case that the habitual tendency is so strong that it's like you can't get out of the tar. You just, you make it almost like tar. You know, you pull your part of you out of it, and the tar is still there, and it pulls you back in. And you pull out, and it pulls you back in. It can be very, very difficult. The reason why that happens is that we don't think in full equations. Actually, we don't know how to think at all. Our reasoning ability is extremely flawed. There are good reasons for this. First of all, our reasoning ability is based on the information given to us by the five senses. The five senses are the five delusions. They are completely deluded. And the reason why is that the five senses are actually the working extension of ego. And ego is the understanding and belief that self-nature is inherently real. And it is, and ego completely does not understand and is completely asleep to the understanding that the Buddha nature is inherently pure, complete, and radiant, free of discrimination, free of contrivance, free of limitation. We have no sense of that. The ego has no sense of that. The ego understands only in its completely limited way. So, that being the case, we find ourselves to be somewhat defenseless. We are basing everything that we think and feel and react to on the information of the five senses. The information of the five senses tells you that when you eat delicious food, you feel much better. Even if we eat the wrong kind of food and 2 hours later we have indigestion, we just don't get the connection. Even if we eat delicious food and a year later we're as fat as a cow or skinny as a rail, we still don't get the connection. Even if we drink like fish and eat all kinds of interesting food and we don't, and our lives are falling apart because we're drinking like fish. I don't mean water either. I mean, you know, the heavy stuff, alcohol. If we do that, and then we don't understand why our lives are falling apart. We just don't get the connection. We just don't think in whole equations, you see? We eat bad food, we watch our teeth fall out. We eat bad food, we watch our energy level go down. We watch ourselves age, we watch all of these things happen, and we still don't get it. And it's because our mouth, one of those five senses, that taste, has told us that delicious food is happening. Doritos are happening. They are happening, boy. You have them with some salsa mixed with a little sour cream, oh boy, that's happening. The fact that it's making you sick as a dog, you don't think about that. Could be, because Doritos have all kinds of crazy things in them. Things I can't pronounce. Never eat food with things you can't pronounce. That's a good guideline. So we see things, and if they are pleasing to our eyes, a little bit like that dog I described earlier, isn't it? If it's pleasing to our eyes, it must be good. And if we go to some place and we experience something and it's just sensually nice, it must be good. The fact that it's keeping us from practicing any Dharma or seeing any truth or getting any reality or preparing for our next life or even preparing for our death. So what? It feels good. You know, and then we spend all our lives just fritting away our energy and social things and parties and romances and cars and whatever, drugs, all kinds of stuff. We fritter away our whole lives and stuff like that. We don't even have the equation. If I do this, then this will happen. There's no room in our minds for that equation. Or if I don't practice Dharma and I fritter away my life, then my life will surely end quickly with no good result. We don't think in whole equations, you see? And so we find ourselves in a state of profound delusion. Rinpoche and I had a discussion, just a regular discussion, just two of us talking together. And we were discussing you. We often do. Not you in particular. If I looked at anyone in particular, please excuse me. But you in general, students, how to teach, how to help them respond, how to hook, how to nurture, how to make them firm. And Rinpoche and I were talking about something that's really important, and you should hear Rinpoche's idea about it, which is quite absolutely true, is that students seem to have almost like a moat around their minds. You know, a protective moat, in a sense, impenetrable. And the information that comes to them about Dharma has a very difficult time getting across that moat. That moat is almost like the karma of dullness, slothfulness, of just the repetition of never completing the equation, just never plunging deeper than the most superficial understanding of what life is about. That's what that moat is, and all seem to have it. So he said, what often happens, and he said the teacher really has to be sharp and see it, is that often the students will begin to look like Dharma is happening. They start to wear Dharma clothes. You see, I have a chuba on today. That's Dharma clothes. You too can have Dharma clothes. So, and then, and sometimes they really wear Dharma clothes. And they wear Dharma hair. No hair. It's like they say a pure thought is no thought, a pure head is no hair. I don't know. So they, students can start to really look like Dharma. And they can even repeat back. Like I can say to them, what are the Four Noble Truths? Bingo, I bet you a good amount of you could give it right back to me. What are the thoughts that turn the mind? Bingo, I bet you some of the older students could really give it right back to me just like a flash. But then if you examine their lives, you'll notice that none of those things are being implemented. If none of those things are being implemented, you can guarantee yourself, you can be assured that while they are repeating Dharma by rote, it's exactly the same kind of thing as the dog who has learned that the door will give him relief. And maybe not even as well. Maybe not even as well, because if any of us could recognize the door to liberation, we have the door to urination and the door to liberation. If we could recognize the door to liberation as well as the dog could recognize the door to urination, maybe we'd go out. Maybe we would exit samsara. But unfortunately, we don't even have that one going for us. We can't even do that. We simply don't have that kind of reasoning ability. We practice the teaching in such a way as to repeat it back. We contemplate on it, and we think, kind of like the dog. Oh, it feels so good to sit here and study the Dharma. I just feel like a real person when I do that. I have my little cup of tea, my little glass of water, my little mala. Isn't that pretty, mala? And my little book, and I get to sit in this chair, and it's so nice. And I've actually seen Dharma practitioners come in, and they bring the crystals here. There's crystals set up. Then your mala's there, your cup of tea, and you have your books laid out. Just so, first, second, third, those are the way I'll use them. And then you sit there, and you prepare for Dharma. And then nothing happens. Because the experience that you're relying on there is the experience of incomplete equations. It just feels good to do that. You're reacting sensually, like the dog. You're saying, oh, it feels good to be a good person. It feels good to be in this position. Isn't it wonderful that I can do this? It feels calm. I've done the right thing. I am good. I am moral. I am spiritual. It feels good. It just feels good, you see? So that kind of experience of Dharma is pretty much useless. If that's what you do in the beginning and then you progress to deeper experience of Dharma, then you can say that that experience in the beginning was useful and good. But if you don't progress any deeper in that, might as well go out and have a good time. Because the results won't be that good. Instead, we have to think of Dharma in complete equations, so that Dharma actually penetrates our life. When you come into class, when you come into the temple, when you take vows to be a Buddhist, when you pick this thing up, you should think to yourself, I'm doing this so that I can change. Not only expect change, not only become unafraid of change, or become unshocked when change is in your life, but avidly seek to change. We are samsaric beings in samsaric existence. We are experiencing old age, sickness, and death. Most of us in this room at least have had some of two out of three. And the other one's not far off. And so we have old age, sickness, and death. We have impermanence. Even the great joys that we have felt, they have not lasted for very long, have they? And they've always been interspersed. And even when we feel great joy, when we feel bliss, there's that backslap that comes with it, like you're almost afraid to be that happy. Because you know what's going to happen after that. Climb a mountain, you know the next thing you've got to do is climb down. And that's exactly how samsara is. It's just like that. So we have to think in complete equations like that. We have to think that we need to change. We need the change. You must jump into it and challenge yourself. Some people come into Dharma almost walking in the room backwards so that I won't see them. I'll think they're leaving and I won't pay attention. They're afraid they're going to be affected. They're afraid that they're going to be changed. They're afraid that I might say something to them that might disturb their beliefs. They have known themselves this way. I'm like this for so long, you know. I'm like this, this is my characteristic. I've never done well with this. I've always been better at that. This thing I don't like, that I do. And they come in and they kind of give it to the teacher and say, work with it. Oh no, I don't think so. That isn't the way to practice Dharma. Basically, you should come in, leave that stuff outside, and look at the way to think clearly, to experience complete equations, and most of all, to change, to become more virtuous. Continuing in our own habitual tendencies, we'll continue to get pretty much the same, a mixture of happiness and unhappiness. And we can never predict what that mixture will be. Some of us will say, well, you know, if it's 75-25, I'll settle. I mean, that's the way we think. But you can't predict, even if it has been 75-25 for the most of your life. How do you know it's going to be like that? Ask somebody that has been struck with AIDS. Ask somebody that's been hit with a car. Ask somebody that has lost their most beloved one. Ask somebody that has experienced a financial crash of some kind. Ask someone that has found happiness in a relationship or a home or something like that and watched it all fall apart out of their control. You simply can't trust samsara, and you simply cannot trust your perception that is telling you that everything is just fine now. We have to work very hard to move against our own illogical or even lack of thinking. Learn to think in complete equations. Those of you that are practicing preliminary practice or ngundro, you're in the best possible position because the equations that you need are cited in the book, in the thoughts that turn the mind. And I will briefly tell you some of them. Basically, you can remember this. It's so simple and so hard, isn't it? Non-virtue creates suffering. Non-virtue is anything that concerns ego clinging, anything that concerns selfishness, anything that is lacking in morality or ethics. This is non-virtue. Even ignorance which seems to be kind of neutral, just the ignorance of wanting to live your life in a happy way, not think about anything, la 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 la, even that is non-virtue. Because you're basically creating the habitual tendency of a slothful, reactive mind. You see? Those things are major and minor examples of non-virtue. Non-virtue always creates unhappiness, just like apple seeds create apple trees and apple fruits. You can't get an apple seed to create a banana. No way, to my knowledge. It simply isn't possible. Virtuous activity creates happiness. And it does. It really does. At first you'll doubt it because your five senses have their own habitual tendencies. And they'll say, I want to taste, I want to feel, I want to see beauty, I want to feel beauty, I want to be comfortable, these kinds of things. That's what your five senses are going to tell you. So at first you're not going to believe this. Your five senses are going to say, immediate gratification. That's what we need, that's what we've always had, that's what we want. Let's hear it for immediate gratification. And that's really what your brain is going to do, what your mind is going to tell you, what your senses are going to tell you. But as you begin to create the habitual tendency of virtue, you will find that in that point, the mind becomes less reactive and it becomes more peaceful. Less hills and valleys, mountains and valleys. You know, most people spend their lives going way up, hyperactive, hyperspastic rubber band, and then going way down like, oh, I can hardly live. Most of us, and we do it momentarily. It's not just like a bad year and a good year. We're talking, we change moods like every 10 minutes. The fluctuations of the psychic winds and channels within our nature are so radical when we're really embedded in the mind of duality that our feelings and what feels good to us 1 minute may 10 minutes later feel bad. We are that reactive and that strung out. So at first it won't feel like virtue makes happiness, but actually virtue creates kind of, it takes down the mountains, most of which is like a nervous, reactive, kind of hyperspastic energy. It calms, and those high mountains actually irritate the mind and cause you to go into the next fall or next slump. You see, the manic side of our moods actually irritates the mind, irritates us, and causes us to go into the next slump, is the catalyst for it. So what virtue will do is take down the mountains, bring up the valleys. Not only do you feel calmer and more relaxed, but there is a feeling of more spaciousness. Like instead of being bound and in intense feelings and reactions all the time, it's like you have space. Yeah. Better, calmer. And then from inside, the funniest thing starts to happen. A kind of natural happiness comes up. It isn't like the hyperspastic rubber band stuff you were doing on top of the mountain, you see. But it's like a natural fountain of well-being and happiness, calm and peaceful. It's like your mind has the space for happiness. It feels like you, but the real you, the good part, the happy part. And it is, because that happiness that naturally occurs in a spacious mind is not different from a display of your own true nature, which is bliss. Because your own true nature is bliss, not hyperspastic bliss, but open, spacious, uncontrived, natural bliss. Simply being here in a content and true way. That's your nature. That would be a display of your nature were it allowed to really come forth. Were you to awaken to it, were you to perceive your nature in a clear way through practice. And so, of course, practicing virtue then is extremely important and will make you happy. But if you're a quick fix glutton or addict, you're going to have a little trouble with this one. And who isn't? So at first, you have to simply rely on the teaching, expect to change, want to change, leave your baggage outside, come into your Dharma experience clean, pure. Rely on the advice of your teachers. Give rise to virtuous activity. Making offerings to the three precious jewels, keeping your practice, trying to be kind to others, practicing compassion, nurturing others, making it possible for others to obtain happiness. All of these things that you have been trained to do, and all you have to do is stick around here for a while and you'll see what to do. These things will make you happy eventually. My own personal experience is that I have students who have been with me for quite some time, some of which I know at least 2 of which had psychotherapy for 10 years. And I mean, frankly, between you and me, they came to me as crazy as loons. However, they are no longer crazy. And do you know why? Because their minds have relaxed. They simply relaxed. Simply relaxed through doing virtuous activity. Simply virtuous activity. I remember the first time I said to this one student in particular, you're never going to get out of your depression until you start aggressively showing compassion and kindness toward others. Because the cause of your depression is self-absorption and lack of kindness to others in the past. I remember this person looked at me like, come on, I thought you were going to say something sensible. Or, that's baby talk. That's so simple. I mean, I need drugs. I need therapy. I've got to have it. You know? That's the kind of thinking that we have. And yet, today, this person is really kind to others, goes out of her way to be helpful to others, and it really has turned her mind towards virtue. And she's not seeing any therapist, and she's happy, and people remark on how nice it is to be with her, because she's always a happy person. So that's one example, and you might say, well, that's one example, maybe she's special, probably it won't work for me. And I tell you, that's your funny perception talking to you. That's the moat around your brain, and that's the dog standing at the door just not getting a clue about anything. That's what's happening. Please, in the beginning, trust your teachers. If they tell you that certain kinds of activity will increase your happiness, just do it. Do it. It's a bit like beginning exercise. If you begin exercise, it's very difficult, because at first when you start exercising, you can hardly do any. You don't have any capacity for it. It's exhausting, and you think, this is horrible. And then, and then after you exercise, it's even worse. First time you exercise, it's really horrible, but then the day after, the result seems to be extreme anguish and terrible pain. And you think to yourself, I don't see how this can be good for you. I know, and you do, in fact, feel a little bit sicker the next day, because everything you have hurts in places that you could never have imagined. Well, Dharma is, unfortunately, it's a bit like that when you start to take your teacher's advice. In that, at first, and I swear, no muscle pains unless you do prostrations. In that, at first, you're going to be starting a new habit, building a new muscle. So you're going to feel like, oh, so now I have to be consistently and aggressively kind towards others. I have to spend all my time making wishing prayers for them. My own prayers haven't even come true yet. How am I going to spend my time making wishing prayers for them? No, that's the way we think. And pray for the long life of others? I'm the one that's getting gray. Why would I pray for the long life of others? I'm comfortable being the crab that I've always been. That's the way I am, and by golly, I'm going to stick up for myself because that's the way I am. And it's very uncomfortable to try to learn how to simply be nice. Making offerings Forget that. I spend most of my, how many hours a day do we spend making money? We spend all of our time trying to make some money. If we don't spend time trying to make money, we spend time trying to get money. But somehow, we're always trying to look out to make ourselves prosperous. And now you're saying I should give some of it, I should buy something for somebody. I should make an offering to the three precious jewels? I don't think so. That's how we think, you see. Our teachers are telling us to change our habits, and at first, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Supposing you were to make a beautiful basket of fruit and put it at the altar. Supposing that basket of fruit costs you $20. Supposing you were to remember how long it took you to make that $20. And there's part of you that goes, I don't think I like this. If I wasn't going to have that $20 for myself, I should have stayed home those 2 hours or 3 hours. Could have slept in late. You see, thoughts like that will come up. It will be difficult for us, but you must persevere. You make that offering, and when those thoughts come up, and they will, and you resist, and you will, you think to yourself, that's my mind doing that stupid thing again. Don't put yourself down too much. Just look at it and say, God, dumb. Or just look at it and say, yeah, that's my mind doing that thing again. But go ahead and persevere. And in fact, as you make the offering, say, by the virtue of having made this offering, please purify my motivation. And eventually, you will feel differently. It's as though the weight will be heavier in the pile of virtue. So your personality will naturally go in that direction. Whereas now the weight is heavier in this pile, the pile of non-virtue. So you must find a way to drain that moat, put down the bridge, let Dharma come into you. Let it come deep. Don't change your actions, change your heart. Change your mind. Don't just change on the outside. Let it take you over. You think that you're being protective about yourself, you see, because this is me, and I don't like to change. I don't like to give it over. You know, you think you're being protective, but you don't even know what you are. You don't even understand what your nature is. You're reacting to your own past karma, period. That is the sum total of all the experience that you are having. You are now experiencing swimming in the sea of your own causes, your own karma. You don't have a clue as to what you are. This idea of self-nature being inherently real and being in the box of skin that yours seems to be in, it's a complete fabrication. You are primordial luminosity. You are the very display and not separate from the Buddha nature. And to awaken to that, one must practice Dharma. One must practice virtuous activity. That is necessary. And so I have given you this teaching to deepen or to help to develop what Rinpoche touched on the other day. His time is limited. Unfortunately, our Rinpoche is getting older. He can't teach as long as he does, as he used to. And so, that, again, another example of impermanence. But while I'm on that subject, let me tell you that our Gyaltsen Rinpoche, he is amazing. When I think of who can comfort me, who can I go to, who is my brother, who is my spiritual friend and my root guru, he is one of my root gurus, I think of him. He is the sun to me, the sun in a very dark world. I am not going to cry. Every time I think about him, I start crying. Let me tell you that Gyaltsen Rinpoche keeps with the custom of the lamas. The lamas, you can tell a person with some realization by their humility. If a person says to you, I am enlightened, walk out. Just walk away. If a person says to you, I am an incarnation of Buddha, walk away. Because the true mind of enlightenment is not like that. Even Lord Buddha, when he was asked, said, "I am awake." Now, Gyaltsen Rinpoche acts like he's so funky and humble. You know, if anyone ever pays him a compliment, he has this weird habit of taking his tongue and putting it between the space in his teeth and making a face that you wouldn't believe. And that's just what he does. He keeps in the custom of the teachers, which is that it is less important for the student to know great things about the teacher than it is for them to understand their own true nature. But I'll tell you this, it is also important for the student to recognize the mind of realization when they see it, and to follow that mind in a very definite way. And I will tell you that our Gyaltsen Rinpoche is no funky Lama. He is the most pure, and he is there's no one purer than him, and he is totally a heavyweight Lama. And in terms of how he conducts himself, he seems so reachable, so ordinary, so just humble. He is following in the style of a Dzogchen Lama. That means to say that his view is so pure that he doesn't discriminate in the way ordinary sentient beings discriminate in terms of high and low. Things are the same taste to him. So you have my permission that when he does his funky routine, you have my permission to roll your eyes and go, yeah. Well, not too obtrusively, but that's what you should think. Whatever he says like that, it's not true. He is amazing. And whatever nectar comes from his mouth, you should drink it. Take it completely. None of the lamas who are pure will make claims for themselves. And he is so pure. But I'll tell you that he's like the sun. And so many of the blessings that you see in this place is because of his influence. He says it's all because of me. I think it's all because of him. So I wanted to tell you that so that you can continue to take advantage of his teachings and to understand also that, once again, perception may not be all it's cracked up to be. Please listen to the advice of your teachers. They have crossed the ocean of suffering and they know how to get across. And they want you to go as well. So, thank you very much. That's all we have time for.
Juling,